Chapter 17. Pawning gold rings in hell. Money kept pouring in from the weed sales. I started to buy 2 ounces a week instead of just 1, and started spreading out the visits to replenish my supplies less often, just so the clinic wouldn't get suspicious, which I figured they might be. No one could smoke all that weed in a few days, which I'm sure they knew, but they weren't going to turn down any paying customer who was coming in with $200 to $400 per visit, so nothing was ever said. I bought myself a beautiful beach cruiser with the extra money I was making. It was a midnight blue and big, made for a big old fucker like me. Lourdes texted me one hot, beautiful day to ask me if I wanted to go for a ride along the beach. I was excited to try out my new wheels and told her to come on over. She came through the door in a huff over one thing or another. I could see on her face that she was frustrated and rushed. I was listening to a song on my computer, a rockabilly number by the Hurricanes. I was dancing about and playing air guitar when she clapped her hands at me and barked, "What the fuck, are you ready to go or what?" I looked at her like she was crazy and replied, yeah, let me slip on my shoes and we can go, little Miss Fussy Pants." She didn't find that funny and stormed out. "I'll be waiting out front, I don't have all day for this shit." She snipped. We rode south down Ocean Boulevard to where the bike path that ran along the sand began, and headed back north toward Alamitos Avenue. There was a long hill you dropped down from the street onto the path along the beach. I cruised down it into the wind and started pedaling when it leveled out, when suddenly Lourdes sped past me, cranking as fast as she could. She had a little mountain bike, one built for speed, and she was not more than 110 pounds soaking wet. I, on the other hand, was over 340, on a bike that had to weigh a good 50 pounds, made for cruising. She left me in the dust, pedaling as fast as her legs could go, getting smaller and smaller as she sped away, until she vanished. No matter how fast I could pedal, which was not very fast, physics would not allow for me to ever catch up. I figured she'd just ride ahead to get in a good workout and ride back to me. But I rode clear down to the marina that sat across the bay from the Queen Mary, and could find neither hide nor hair of her. I rode back and forth, looking in every direction, but she was nowhere to be found. I finally stopped, out of breath, heart pounding, and went for my phone to call her, when I saw that she had texted me saying, "Had to leave. I'm back home. Ken made dinner plans at a nice place tonight." Maybe I'm crazy, but that really hurt me. If I had been the one who had asked her out for a ride, I would have, for one thing, ridden with her. Because what's the point of asking her along if I was just going to speed away from her and leave her in the dust? And even if I did want to speed up to get my heart rate up for a workout, I would have told her to catch up with me somewhere down the path, or ridden back and finished the route with her at her speed. But I would never, ever rush off and leave her behind, then take off and leave her there by herself. Not in a million years. I felt hurt, disrespected, and frankly, insulted. I slowly pedaled home down 2nd Street, a bit choked up and depressed. It felt as though she did the whole thing on purpose. A weird way of telling me something, but I couldn't put a finger on what. All I knew was that even though the sun was out, it seemed a lot dimmer after that little incident. A few days later, I got a call from a voice I hadn't had to contend with for several months. It was my boss from Stars and Stripes Transportation, Jody Gomez. "Hey, Chris. Just wanted to touch base with you and let you know that the route you ran for us got canceled. We had to sell your truck and a couple of the others and just have one running now. The last guy that was driving your truck ended up having a heart attack and dying in the driver's seat. They found him at that little rest stop near San Onofre, dead as a doornail. His family sued us for workers' comp, and we had to pay out a lot of money. So I'm afraid you don't have a job to come back to after your disability is up." That old gray wolf turned out to be an 18-wheel coffin after all. But not my coffin. I had found a way to survive. They probably worked the poor devil to death, the way they nearly had with me. Well, I guess that means I can collect unemployment then. I mean, you guys had every intention of hiring me back when I got better, right? I asked. Well, I mean, I don't know if we would have. I mean, I never said... Well, we did say, but that was before you found a way to stay gone. She yammered. Jody, I have the text messages saying you had every intention of hiring me back. She hung up without saying goodbye. The lousy cunt. She knew good and goddamn well that they were holding my job for me. I called the unemployment office the next morning at the crack of 7 a.m. I wanted to see what my options were. You had to dial the number at 6:59 exactly, or else you got a busy signal. Then you had to hurry and dial through the options quickly, or you would get a message saying that they were overrun with callers, and you'd have to call back again the next day. I had gotten very good at this routine, and got on cue to speak to a representative. I was on hold for an hour, but I finally got someone. She told me I'd have to wait until my disability ran out before I could even apply for unemployment, and that the processing of the application could take several weeks. They'd have someone call with your case to ask you questions about the circumstances of your termination to see if you qualified to receive unemployment compensation. It was a good thing I had a little money in savings that could carry me over while they were processing the paperwork, but it was just enough. I'd have to curb my spending until I got things sorted out. Lourdes had become uncommunicative again. Her texts and phone calls dwindled down to a couple a day, down considerably from the 50 or so she'd usually blow up my phone with. It was confounding as to why, but then I saw something on the butcher's social networking that helped me figure it out. His shop got a write-up in the LA Weekly. He posted the cover photo on his Facebook page. It was a picture of Lourdes, the baby, and the butcher at his shop in front of the chopping block. The write-up went on to say that his artisan shop was the best in town, with the most exclusive celebrity clientele in all of Los Angeles, and that investors just gave him a boatload of money to open 3 more shops, making it a franchise. The picture sickened me. Lourdes had her head resting on his shoulder, arms wrapped around his, the ever-devoted wife. What total shit. When the time came and I received my last disability check, I applied for unemployment straight away. I didn't waste a second on getting the ball rolling. A week or so later, I received a scheduled phone call from a representative from the unemployment office. I told her that I had to go on disability as requested by my doctor, and that during my sick leave, my boss's shady business practices had caught up with them, and they had to sell my truck, canceling the route I ran for them, and was laid off. I had the messages from them saying that they wanted me back when I was feeling better, but that they were now reneging. The rep told me they would review the case and would mail me the results of their investigation. Just a few short days later, I got a letter in the mail saying that they were rejecting my request for unemployment benefits, and that I could apply for an appeal of their decision, but that the process would likely take up to 3 months. I was flabbergasted. I didn't have the money to last that long without receiving regular checks, even with weed sales. My bosses had probably lied and told them that they never had any intention of having me back after my disability ran its course, and I couldn't present any evidence to contradict them until I could get a trial. I was in a panic. I applied for an appeal right away and started figuring out how the hell I was going to get by until I was flush again. I texted Lourdes about the letter. She wrote back immediately saying, "I knew something like this would happen, and I put the blame on you. You could have found work, but all you want to do is lay around and eat and fuck. I'm sorry, but this is something you have to face on your own. Ken and I are working things out, and it's going splendidly. He's changed a lot now that his business is growing and more money is pouring in. So we can't continue with this terrible deception. I need a real man in my life, not a charming loser. Goodbye, Christian. I was fucking gutted. I was starting to suspect that Lourdes' devotion swayed any which way the wind blew as it suited her needs. Our little bike excursion was her underhanded way of saying that I wasn't keeping up, on our ride that day or in ways she deemed worthy. It seemed that in spite of my best efforts and an unabounded and unconditional love for her, her love was very conditional. I'd either have to be very successful or, failing that, extremely fit, preferably both. But I was neither. I was shit-canned again. By her, by my bosses, by the bureaucrats at the unemployment office. I had been made redundant. I went out into the courtyard and sat on the stairs and watched as big black rain clouds rolled in over my head. It looked like another storm was brewing. Weeks of rain followed. The days and nights were a blur of depression, frustration, longing, and uncertainty. I couldn't spare the money to restock my supply of weed for my customers, so sales screeched to a halt. My cupboards, once stocked to the hilt with all manner of sundries, chips, cookies, expensive sesame crackers, cereals, cans of soup, and the fridge full with cold chicken, homemade stews, good cheeses, fruits and veggies in the crisper, and ice cream in the freezer, were all but bare now. I had a few cans of beans, some bread, and some apples that Uncle Robert brought me from a food bank that he frequented on Sundays in front of a chapel in downtown Long Beach. I'd spend my days trying to eke out a few lines of poetry, some short stories, some of the narration for the documentary, anything to take my mind off my sorrows. Uncle Robert would come over and tell me stories of the people in the pictures from our family albums, giving me great insight to create the screenplay. He was also helpful in a way that I never would have expected. He understood my heartache over losing Lourdes, and gave me great advice on how to deal with it. He had once been a great-looking and suave son of a bitch like my father, and had many love affairs. It was hard to see that considering his sorry state, but he had been with some stunningly beautiful and sophisticated women over the years, and had felt the sting of heartache on more than one occasion. Just having him there, listening, understanding, helped me immeasurably. Hey, man, all us Pasquale men are lover boys, Don Juans. Think of how much better that is than being a loveless, pussyless wonder. But there is always a price to pay, youngster. Always, he'd say. I take long walks through the dark, wet, windy afternoons, pounding the pavement, trying to wear myself out so I could sleep well at night. On one such day, I was walking down to the beach via Alamitos Avenue, feeling especially sad and broken, when I heard the terrible sound of dogs whining and screaming out as if they were being tortured. I looked around to see where the sounds were coming from, but I couldn't make out from where. It seemed to be pouring out of the sky from every direction. People passing me on the street didn't seem to hear it, walking by unaffected. I walked as fast as my legs could carry me to get out of earshot. Every face I passed on the beach seemed demonic, monstrous, pointed. The ocean, once blue with the summer sun, glistening and windswept, was now a black, murky abyss. The gulls overhead screeched and flapped with stark yellow eyes, mocking me with disdain. I marched on through the rain, every step feeling like I was walking through wet cement, my every energy drained. I hiked up to Bigsby Park and stood watching the oil tankers plowing slowly through the Black Sea and felt the cold wind stinging my eyes. I reached in my pocket and texted Lourdes. Are you still my best friend at least? Because I'll always see you as mine. I stood there in the rain and wind and waited and waited and waited some more for her reply. But there was none. People walked past, staring at me as I stood there, crying, openly, face and eyes glowing red, tears running down my face. The sky dark and stormy, the ocean like black mud. I felt myself become completely unhinged. The anguish was indescribable. I think it would be safe to say that I was having a complete nervous breakdown. I wanted to crawl out of my skin. I was trembling inside, feeling like I was going to explode. And I mean that. It felt like an imminent explosion was welling inside, a time bomb. I walked back to my place. If I was going to keel over and die, I wanted to do it in the comfort of my own home. I made it back, sucking wind, shuddering, soaking wet, trying to catch my breath, and flopping down on my bed. Mona, sensing something was wrong, whined and cuddled up to my face. I held her and tried to assure her that I was okay. I buried my face in her chest and let it all go. It felt like the tears were going to wring my eyes inside out, like they were attached to my heart with chains and were dragging it out through my eye sockets. It was a deep, mournful sobbing, and an utter shock just to know that someone, anyone, had that kind of power over my happiness. It was a dreadful realization, one that shook me to my core. She never got back to me. With all that mental anguish rattling around in my head, it was a wonder how I could even begin to tackle the matter of my financial well-being. But there was still a fight in me yet. I had to look myself in the mirror, slap myself across my stupid face, splash some ice-cold water in my eyes, and man the fuck up. I looked around the room for things I could sell, put ads on Craigslist, and sat down to do some math. I'd have to shed what little I had, but if it meant carrying me over long enough to get my trial and get what was coming to me, I'd be willing to go without. There was no fucking way in hell I was getting behind the wheel of another truck as long as I lived. I started with the big items first. I called my mom's friend from work, the one that had taken my '51 Chevy for safekeeping, and asked him if he'd be interested in buying her from me. I had bought her for over $6,000, but he said all he could afford to take her off my hands was $2,000. I can't tell you how hard a pill that was for me to swallow. I had big plans for that little honey, but it was just a luxury I could no longer afford. I bit the bullet and took the deal. There were other hot rods out there, but there would only ever be one Juanita. Goodbye, old girl. Then I sold my guitar and amp. This, too, hurt especially bad. I had raised holy hell with that axe. We had spread chaos and beautiful mayhem together, shredded thousands and thousands of notes, busted eardrums, made a million mad and wild teenagers dance and slam into each other from sea to shining sea. Now I was selling it to a firefighter who needed it to play at dances and picnics with his church group. It was another heartbreaking moment. Then it was my father's rings. He had left them to me when he died. It wasn't like I would ever wear them. Even Elvis Presley would have found them to be too gaudy. One was a crucifix with Jesus nailed to it, with diamonds where the nails would be in his hands and feet. The other was two eagles, wings spread, with a black onyx and diamonds in between their wingspans. Not to my liking. so I pawned them off at a jewelry store. The gold was worth a good amount, but the diamonds were glass. I got $80 for the pair. I sold my dumbbells, a pea coat, all my CDs, DVDs, some sneakers I never wore, and some mint-condition coins my grandmother left me. I would have sold my bike next, but I wouldn't have a chance, as it turned out. One morning, I got a knock on the door from one of my neighbors. "Who the hell is it?" I yelled from under the covers. "Hey, bud, sorry to bother you. It's Greg from next door. The lock to your bike is cut in two and lying on the ground." I just sighed. "Are you trying to tell me that someone stole my bike?" I asked. Yeah, basically," said Greg. "And the hits just keep on coming," I thought to myself, as I pulled the covers over my head, wishing away the pain and frustration that seemed to swarm around my life at every turn. Still, I had enough to squeak by until my trial. I was still open to any way to make extra money if I could, and as luck would have it, Uncle Robert had a hookup that could help me. He had a friend who was trying to unload some really good weed for a mere $100 an ounce. He had 20 trash bags packed full of it. If I could flip that and could keep flipping it at $100 a pop, I could at least get the business up and running again. I told Robert that if he connected me with his friend, I'd break him off a quarter that he could flip for $100, start buying his own ounces, and start his own thing. He was also looking for a new payee since him and his girlfriend broke up, and no one else was willing to do it. The courts wouldn't let him handle his own money, and he needed someone to step up quick. I told him I was willing to help him out for making the connection for me. Besides, he did need someone to keep an eye on his cash, or else he would blow it all and would be destitute without question. The very next day, his buddy showed up in an old beat-up pickup truck in the alley behind my building. Uncle Robert told me to give him the money and wait in the apartment while he ran down to grab the goods. But I knew how he operated. He'd go into the bag and pull off a big chunk for himself, even though I was already giving him a quarter. So I started down the stairs ahead of him, and you can tell he didn't like it one bit. I didn't care. It was my money, and if anyone was going to handle the merchandise, it was going to be me. As we walked down the stairs, Robert tried to stop me. "Hey, wait a minute, man. This dude is only expecting me. You're going to scare him off." I stopped dead in my tracks, looked him straight in his jive-ass face, and said, "Then there's no deal. Tell him to go fuck himself," and turned to walk back up the stairs. "Wait, shit! Motherfucker, you're just like your goddamn father, you know that?" "Yeah, I've been told," I said, marching past him into the alley. Of course, the dude wasn't freaked out in the slightest. He handed me a paper bag. I could smell the quality the second I held it. I handed him a $100 bill. He thanked me and drove off. Simple. We went back in the apartment, and I weighed out a quarter ounce for Robert and thanked him. "Now don't smoke this shit. It's for sale. You smoke it all, then you won't be able to buy an ounce of your own," I scolded. Yeah, youngster, I know what I'm doing. I was selling bud when you were still swimming around in your daddy's nuts." But what I predicted came to pass. A week later, he was knocking on my door, asking if I could give him another quarter. "What happened to the quarter I gave you to sell?" I asked. "Well, man, you know, I sold a bit, smoked a bit. Then the dudes I sold it to didn't have any money on hand, so I floated it to them until they had some cash, but now they're flaking on me, so I haven't made any money on it yet." "Well, if ifs and buts were candies and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas." "Sorry, man, I sold what I had already. I actually need another ounce from your friend. Can you call him for me?" Yeah. Yeah, I'll call him when I get back to the pad, said Uncle Robert, sulking out the door. But I never heard back. I called him several times to see what was taking so long, but I got no reply. I finally saw him on the street one day and asked him what was up. He shot me an ornery look and spat. Why should I hook you up with my friend when you stole all my customers? I had every head in my building eating out of my hand, and you snatched them right out from under me. Your customers? You need to sell a product to have customers. Your so-called customers came to me because they said you never have what you say you're going to have. Whatever you get, you smoke. Do you even have a scale to weigh out what you gave away? I don't need a scale. I've been in this game longer than you've been alive, chump. Uncle Robert, you have no game. Your game is shot out. You think you're going to cut me out of the action? No. You and your little buddy can try, and I'll sit back and laugh when you fail, because you will fail. He stormed off down the street. He knew what I was saying was true. Even among his burnout friends, he was deemed untrustworthy and completely unreliable, which was really saying something. What was probably even more frustrating for him was that he still had to come to me for money since I became his new payee. He was already pissed about that because I told him the only way I'd do it was if he agreed to only receiving $100 a week after his rent was paid, so he wouldn't go through it all in a few days. That way he wouldn't be begging his neighbors, or me for that matter, for money and drugs until payday. It was true what I said, though. He had once had some game, some swagger, a decent hustle, but that was all gone. He was a shell of his former self, a husk. He had scrambled what was once a good brain to a fumbling, overconfident, delusional mess, always showing his ass, dropping the ball, his scams all outmoded and passé, and his woes were far from over. But I had woes of my own. Without Robert's connection, I couldn't afford to restock my supply. I'd have to use what I made off that ounce to pay bills and rent now that I didn't have a steady supply of cheap goods to flip. At least my trial is coming up, I thought to myself. And that was only if I won in court. If not, I was doomed to looking for work again, and I still wasn't filling up to the task. In spite of losing some weight and getting my blood sugar down a bit, I was still on meds for high blood pressure, probably because of my heartache over losing Lourdes. I tried reaching out to her through email. Oh, how I begged and pleaded and made my case to her. But she never wrote me back. It was making me sick. I felt bad looking back at all the times I gave my junkie friends shit about their addictions, when it was obvious that I had addictions of my own. My day in court finally arrived. I went to the same office where I dropped off my disability forms that Dr. Feelgood filled out for me every 3 months. They directed me through an antechamber to a small courtroom. The courtroom wasn't what I expected. In lieu of a bench and a jury box, there was simply a conference table and chairs. The judge came in, not in a robe, but in a plain suit jacket with no tie. I explained exactly what went down and presented him with the text messages from my bosses saying they were holding my job for me when I was well enough to come back to work. He scribbled away as I spoke on some official-looking paperwork, looking up finally and saying, "Thank you for your testimony. You'll receive my decision in the mail." "Okay, thank you. And how long does it take to get that letter, by the way?" I asked nervously. "Oh, it can take up to 2 to 3 weeks," he said, getting up and walking out of the room. I wasn't expecting that. I thought he'd tell me I'd qualify right then and there. I barely had enough to last me a week. I was going to have to stretch things as thin as possible. 2 weeks passed, then another still. I was visiting the food bank with Uncle Robert so I could eat, and had spent all the money I made from selling the Chevy and my guitar on rent. I checked the mail every day, but a letter still hadn't arrived. Then one hungry, cold afternoon, I thought to myself, maybe I can call the number on my disability debit card to see if I have a little left in that account that I forgot I had. Thanks to new technology, you didn't have to wait for a disability check to come in the mail. Instead, they gave you a Bank of America debit card that you received a direct deposit onto. It made things much easier. I was pretty sure I had used everything on it, but I was so tired, stressed, and hungry, I could have forgot. I was willing to try anything. I dialed the number on the back of the card. The recorded message said, "Your current balance is $3,900.79. I nearly fainted when I heard. I pushed the repeat option just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't. The bastards gave in. I had won my case. They deposited all of my back pay for the past 3 months and must have forgotten to mail me the verdict. For all I know, it could have been in there for weeks. No matter, though. I had survived. Happy days were here again. I called my mom, who had been worried sick and had helped me through it all financially whenever she could, and told her the good news. She was elated. Then I went to the grocery store and stocked up on food. I've been living on old bread, apples, and cans of kidney beans for the past 3 months. I was sick to death of it and hungry as a bear. I bought a dozen eggs, bacon, 3 kinds of cereal, extra sharp cheddar cheese, a whole rotisserie chicken, 3 packs of cold cuts, salad, broccoli, green onions, avocados, tomatoes, the best bread on the shelf, crackers, 10 cans of soup, 2 bags of chips, a gallon of mint chocolate chip ice cream, and a big bottle of Patron Silver tequila. I went home and pigged the fuck out, got drunk, jacked off twice, and fell fast asleep. It was the most gratifying afternoon I could ever remember. I went to the dispensary the next day and bought 2 ounces of their top-shelf weed and called all my customers to tell them I was back in business. I sold out in 2 days. I was flush again. Then, like clockwork, Lourdes texted me. It read, "I miss the fuck out of you. I should have never broken it off with you. Ken is in a downward spiral. His partners pulled out of his franchise deal because he was being a bossy jerk, and he's back down to 1 shop. They took back all the money. He's been drinking and throwing fits and being a total cock. I miss the fuck shack. I miss you making me come harder than I ever have in my life. I miss you being so sweet and making me laugh all the time. All I do is cry these days. We haven't even spoken in 4 months. I know you reached out, but I was trying to work things out with Ken, and I knew I'd be tempted to go back to you if we spoke. I have a 6-pack. You mind if I stop by and have a drink and talk?" Now a wise man, a sane man, one with his head screwed on the right way, would have told the fair-weather cunt to go fuck herself. But I was none of those men. I was a slave to love. I was fucked in the head with love, sick to my stomach in love, shot in the chest with love, stabbed in the back with love, drowned in the sea of love. There was no rationale. There was no logic, no reasoning, and nothing in me that could say no. My hand shook as I typed, "Yes, please, I'll be waiting. I miss the fuck out of you too." A half hour later, we were wrapped in each other's arms, tongues mingling in our drunken mouths, sauced on tequila and beer, my fingers in her sopping wet pussy, her hands gripping my painfully hard cock. Every day of our separation melted away, forgotten, all resentment forsaken for the pleasure of her touch, her smell, her lips. They were mine again. I looked up from our embrace and squinted at the bright sun peeking through my blinds for the first time in ages. It had been raining and dark for what seemed like months, but the light was back again. I knew it would be. The question was, for how long?